Crabbe's Journal 17. The wind had dropped and steadied by dark, and the rain drizzled coldly. We scrambled and scratched over the rugged terrain, climbing and slipping. Mary began to make some sense, and I began to hope that if we made it through the night, we'd be okay. One particular ridge would make a mountain goat worry, but we started up, compelled to push on. It went up steeply for maybe 2 stories. There were lots of foot and handholds, all right. On a sunny day, it'd be a fun climb. But with numb, cold fingers and feet like frozen clubs, with 24 hours of travel behind you and your body half dead, it was tough. We tore the flesh on our fingers and banged our knees a million times. The tedious hiss of rain on the rocks was broken by exhausted grunts of exertion. Up we toiled so slowly, unable to see the top until we were almost there. I got over the top first and turned to drag Mary the last few feet. We lay there, breathing heavily. Finally, I sat up. "We made it, Mary," I said. "That's the toughest climb finished, I remember. There's only a couple of ridges left, easy ones. So we're home free. Just a few hours from the lake. We'll never be chased this far." "Let's rest," was all she said. But I took that as a good sign. She was over her panic, and she was back in touch with herself, enough to know she was tired out. Turning our backs on the black pit we had just climbed out of, we picked our way among the rocks and a small stand of scrub oaks. "I'm going to make a fire," I said. "We'll feel better if we can warm up a bit. You sit down." I took Mary by the shoulders and pushed her onto a rock under one of the oaks. 10 minutes later, I coaxed a tiny smoke orange flame from shreds of birch bark and fairly dry twigs. Once the fire had caught on, I stood and said, "I'll go hunt up some more wood." "I'll help," she said, rising unsteadily. No, you stay here. I can manage." "No, I could use the exercise," she said, and laughed. I was so happy and relieved to hear that laugh that I didn't argue with her, just turned and walked a few yards into the black curtain of the bush and groped around in the dark for the wood. When I came back a few minutes later, the little fire was smoking and dying out, so I had to work on it to nurse it back to the point where it would accept bigger sticks. I could hear only the snap of burning twigs, the hiss of rain on wet ground, and rock and on the branches that gave only a little protection. The fire looked almost homey. I could feel a little warmth from it and began to think we'd really made it. We had survived. We would go back, get dry clothes, bake the dammest bonfire ever, and crawl into our toasty down sleeping bags and sleep for days. But I guess it didn't work that way. After a few minutes, I grew concerned that I couldn't hear her. I called her name. No answer. Then again. I retraced our steps. I fretted and ran around, growing more and more frantic. The brave little fire, forgotten, and soon died. Around me was only the dark of the woods, the hiss of the rain. I suppose all along I knew what had happened. After a while I stopped looking and calling. When the cold dawn leaked enough thin gray light into the landscape, I set my jaw and forced myself to look over the edge of the steep rock we had worked so hard to conquer. Mary was down there. She lay on her back, twisted and broken by her fall, to the jagged rocks on the valley floor. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this next part. I did what I had to do, and that's all there is to say about it. The strange thing was, at the time, I couldn't cry. Numb and mechanical and calm, I was empty of emotion as she was of life. I seemed to have complete presence of mind, and after a long time staring at her and building up the courage to climb down and do what was necessary, I carefully picked my way to the bottom. I couldn't take her back to civilization, that was obvious, and I couldn't bury her in the rocky ground. Not even a rock grave would keep animals away for long. I spent all day gathering wood, carefully avoiding looking at her as I returned with each armful. The constant activity kept me warm, and since there was no rain, my clothing dried out a little. Dusk had arrived by the time I finished. The light breeze that blew all day had removed the clouds and dried the air. The first stars began to show when I lit the fire, using several starter boxes with lots of birch bark and branches with the soggy bark ripped off. As the last light faded, I watched from the top of the ridge until I was certain the raging fire would not quit on me. By then it was dark. The stars would give me enough light to travel by if I moved slowly. I took a bearing of the compass and said goodbye, Mary, to the flames that crackled and raged, and turned and left the place. The roar of the inferno gradually faded behind me, and the leaping shadows seemed to show me the way to go.